le monde! Je m'appelle Carmen DeFoy, je suis ici de la Colombie-Britannique pour vous parler des équipes des agents mobiles. That is the extent of my French. So, my presentation today is in English. I can fake French really well in Vancouver, but not in front of you lovely French-speaking people in Montreal. So, you will get me in English. I will try my very hardest to speak slowly. I'm a quick speaker, so yell out at me and tell me if it's going too fast, okay? So a little bit about myself. I work for the BC Financial Services Authority, which is the regulator, the real estate regulator in British Columbia. I'm responsible for the education, the practical education for all of our licensees in the province. And we regulate other industries as well, but I won't bore you too much with that because real estate is what we're here to talk about today. Give you a little background on myself. I have been in real estate for just shy of 20 years, both in industry as well as for the association, and now the regulator, and have been with the regulator for quite some time. So I'm going to go through some new rules for real estate teams that have come into effect in British Columbia and talk to you a little bit about our experiences with those rules. A little, yes. Yes, I can. Okay. How is this? Stop me again, honestly, if it's too fast, okay? So a little look at our agenda today. So I'm going to start by just talking about those new BC requirements. I only have 30 minutes, so it's making me nervous talking this slow. We're then going to move into the team advertising requirements that have come out of the new rules. Then a background on how we actually got to where we are today to give you an understanding of what made us change the rules and implement new ones. And then some stats on the impacts of the new rules that we've seen since implementation. And then finally, I'm going to go through some frequently asked questions that have come as a result of the implementation and moving into implementation. And then, time permitting, I'm happy to take any questions that you all might have. Is that better? Excellent. All right, so I'm going to go into covering the definition for teams and just provide you a little bit of information about what is required to register as a team. So these new rules came into effect on April 1st, 2023. And the real key changes for us were that we implemented the definition of a real estate team into our legislation. It was never there before. We also require now all teams to register with BCFSA, with our organization. So if you want to be on a real estate team, you have to register that with your regulator. And we require advertising to identify the team's name. I'll go into a bit of history just so that you understand kind of the landscape prior to the rule changes. We really had no rules about real estate teams. So it was very much, if you wanted to advertise a team name, you had to register with us. Other than that, it was a bit like the Wild West. So we really did this to make it so that it was clearer to consumers and to licensees what it meant to be on a real estate team. So really, teams prior to this also, I should mention, we would allow them to be comprised of one licensee, so one licensed individual, and one or several unlicensed assistants. We don't allow that anymore. So now it doesn't really make sense to call yourself a real estate team if you only have one person who can provide real estate services. So now these rules require two licensed individuals to be on each team. Individuals cannot provide any kind of a real estate service outside of that team. So what I'm saying basically is that that entire team is the designated agent. The collective of that team is the agent for the client. You can't go and do your own thing on the side because why would you? You work as a team and you provide those services as a team. And finally, all members of that team have to be at the same brokerage. So we can't have a team member over at ABC Realty and another one at XYZ. Makes sense that they're all under the same umbrella. So what constitutes a team? So as I said, we put a definition of a team into our legislation, and I'm going to read it out to you. So it says, a real estate team is a group of two or more licensees that is registered as a real estate team. Not really a useful definition, is it? It doesn't really give you the sense of what is required. So if you go further into our rules, we actually really break it down and define it quite well. So the first The first thing to bear in mind is if 2 or more licensees are representing themselves as an entity, you're a team. That means you're a team, and you must register as such. If you're advertising in any kind of manner as a group or a team, or you're speaking to people and making disclosures to people that me and my business partner are your team, we're working here for you, you're a team. So that second requirement is that if you're regularly engaged with clients together, you should probably register as a team. It means that the brokerage is regularly designating that entire group of licensees as a team for the client. And then the third requirement is a little bit trickier, but basically, if your actions of 2 or more licensees as a group acts like a team and people believe you're a team, you're a team. So you need to be registering as a team. And I'll give you a bit of a history as to why we had these 3 requirements. We have a restriction on dual agency in British Columbia. I believe you have something similar here in Quebec. So that means that a licensee cannot represent a seller and a buyer or competing buyers in the same transaction. We now have a restriction, and we were seeing teams have a really big misunderstanding of how that worked for them. They didn't understand, okay, so I'm a team. Does that mean one of the team members can act for the seller and the other one can act for the buyer? They can't, because they are the collective agent of that client. So these kind of 3 things that we implemented into the rules really helped to kind of cause less confusion in teams that were a little bit confused with the dual agency restriction. So operational requirements for a team, how must that team operate? So as I said, licensees can only provide services through their team. They cannot provide services for that team if they're not a registered member of that team. An individual licensee can only be licensed with 1 team at a time. I'm sure you can imagine it would be super confusing if they had a bunch of different teams that they were partaking in. And we, the regular BCFSA, have to approve the application for members to join a team, as well as their managing broker. So the things that have remained unchanged, that remain the same, is that they have to all be at the same brokerage. So prior to the rules coming into effect, they always had to be in the same brokerage if they wanted to advertise as a team. And it has remained unchanged that brokers, like managing brokers, designate that collective as the agent for the client. So these rules really just kind of did a great job of putting things on paper as to what was already really happening out in the marketplace with teams that were understanding the way that they should be acting. A couple other things about team names. So no duplicates are allowed. Of course, you can't have the same team name on one instance and the exact same team name on the other. That's going to be really confusing for the consumer. So we've said, no, you have to apply. If it already exists, first come, first serve, you're going to have to come up with another name. The terms realty or real estate, so Carmen DeFoy Realty, sounds a little bit like a brokerage. So we have some requirements that say that could be misleading to a public member. So if you're going to use the word realty or real estate, you should probably put the word team or group after it so that Carmen DeFoy Real Estate Group doesn't sound like a brokerage. And you also don't want, we've given a lot of education with licensees. Again, it's not legislated, but these are just good practical tips. When you're picking a team name, have it be a little bit generic because you don't want it to be misleading. If me and Mary are on a real estate team and we decide to register the Carmen and Mary team, and Carmen and Mary get in a really big argument and Mary leaves, kind of misleading if Suzanne comes aboard and she's not Mary, and my name is Carmen and Mary Real Estate Team. So we've talked a lot to licensees about perhaps just thinking about something more generic so that if your business changes or your business arrangements change, you don't have to rebrand your entire brand all over again. So in terms of teams and agencies, so I'm going to go backwards a little bit just so that you understand the landscape of agency in British Columbia. We have 2 agency models in British Columbia. So we have brokerage agency and designated agency. So brokerage agency is where you have every single individual at that brokerage as an agent for the client. We usually see this in really small brokerages and often in kind of rural areas. So for those brokerages, the team's rules really have no effect because everybody at the brokerage is, of course, already a client or a broker or an agent for the client. Designated agency is our other model, and it's the most common, and that's where the managing broker designates somebody as the agent for the client. So again, with these teams rules, you're going to be designating every team member to that client because they're all on the same team. So another caution we've given licensees is that for larger teams, because we do see, I don't know if you do here, have really big teams. Yeah, we have huge, like some have 20, 30, 40 individuals. So another caution we've been giving licensees is just, you can do that, we have no limit, but just be aware of conflicts that could potentially arise when you have that many people on your team, right? So team advertising. So let's take a quick look at the impacts for team advertising. So the team advertising now must appear on all advertising. So prior to the rule implementation, you could advertise your team name, but you didn't have to. Now we're saying if you're registered, you got to advertise that team name. The second rule is that individual team members that wish to advertise on their own, so say if you have your own website separate from your team, you don't see that too much, but it can happen. You also want to make sure that you have that team name in that advertising so that the public knows that you as an individual are a member of that team. With respect to unlicensed assistants, and this is relatively unchanged, you can have unlicensed assistants, of course, but if you're going to put them in your advertising, say as a group of licensees all standing by a sold sign, you have to identify that that unlicensed person is in fact unlicensed, just so that the consumer understands that. Am I still slow enough or have I sped up? This clock is stressing me out. So just to give you a little bit of a background, and I'm not going to bore you too much with it, but just to understand where we came from, we did, so teams were really identified as a regulatory issue for us back in 2018, which is consequently the same year of the dual agency restriction implementation, as I had mentioned. So we went out to consultation and spoke directly actually to managing brokers and to get their feel as to what was going on out there with teams and why people were struggling. And what came from that was that there was confusion from licensees and consumers with respect to agency, as I mentioned, and teams, that we needed to do a better job of enhancing and improving regulatory guidance and rules relating to teams, because as I said, it was a little bit Wild West. We didn't really have much regulation surrounding teams. And that we should be making process improvements to better support managing brokers in this and performing their oversight duties. Because I'm sure you can imagine as a managing broker, there's no requirement to register a team. You might not even know who's working in that capacity in your brokerage. Because we do have some very large brokerages. So just over a year ago, we released a policy intentions discussion paper. So this is what we do in BC when there's going to be a policy change. And we included the proposals that we thought would help with these things that came out of the consultation. We had a really great reception, and when we considered the feedback from the consultation, we then decided to move forward with those proposed changes into the regulatory framework by going to government and requesting a rule change. So that gives you a little bit of a background. So we used to give you about, I'm not going to get into those politics, to give you a background. So we did operate like that in British Columbia, but we lost self-regulation in 2016, and we became a Crown Council or Crown Corp of the provincial government. So that's why we have to go through these things now. So this gives you kind of just the journey from the start of our consultation until today, with the rules implementation coming into effect last April. So we just really, the point of it was that we really wanted to make sure that licensees and the public really understood the proposed changes and were aware of the new rules. So we did spend a lot of time raising awareness, putting out education pieces, and really making people aware of what was happening and getting the buy-in. Because really, at the end of the day, this was a feel-good story. We were doing what came out of the consultation, and people were happy that we were stepping in to regulate this. We actually did the most robust FAQs we've ever done, with every anticipated thing that might come out of these teams' rules, and again, really, really great reception from licensees and the public. One thing that was really important that came out of the consultation was that we needed to be extending our implementation period so licensees could get their advertising and their branding in order. Because, as you recall, we used to allow single licensee teams. Those individuals either had to find a partner or they had to dissolve their team, and that's a big deal. That takes a lot. So we listened, and we actually ended up pushing out our implementation by about 7 months to allow for people to get their affairs in order and be better prepared for the new rule changes. So the consultation results summary, when we went out, as I said, to consultation, just to give you a sense of the kind of participation that we see in British Columbia, we had 1,252 individuals participate in the consultation. We were quite happy with that. Most, as you can imagine, were licensees. 97.8% were licensees, so we didn't have a lot of public members or do not identify members. Of those that responded, we actually had 590 people provide really detailed comments to us, which our policy team actually went through one by one to consider when we were putting forth our recommendations to government. So overall, feedback was really, really useful, really informative, and we felt that this consultation period was a huge success. Just a couple highlights of the things that we received as feedback on the team's messaging. So team size was a thing. We talked about this, large teams. There was a want to limit the size of teams. That's not something that we wanted to do at this time. So this project was really about clarifying the practices that were already happening. We didn't want to be putting in more rules. That's something we might consult on at a future date and see how people feel. But this project wasn't aimed to tackle that. And we've really said to managing brokers, if you want to limit team sizes, have a policy in your brokerage that limits those team sizes, and that seems to have solved that problem for now. Training and education. So we had a lot of individuals who wanted more education, more training. And as I said, that's exactly what we did. And we put out regulatory guidance and information and those robust FAQs I was talking about, and put them on our website. And as well as we have a team of practice standards advisors, that it's my lovely department, 3 wonderful, wonderful humans who field calls from consumers and licensees all the time. So we had quite an influx of Teams calls, but it was great. We were able to answer those questions, and they helped form further FAQs that we could then develop later. Agency and team. So there was a bit of a fundamental disagreement with some that a team should be the collective agent of the client. To that, I would say that it's always been that way. These individuals are sharing confidential information about clients. The purpose of hiring a team is to glean the benefit of working with a team. So I think that just comes down to maybe a bit of a misunderstanding with agency, but we're educating on that, and I think people are now understanding how that all works. And team and brokerage confusion was a little bit. So again, the team naming convention, we were talking about team names that sound like brokerages, potentially misleading to the public. You really need to make sure that they're not doing that. So discussions about that. Requirement to register, which kind of feeds into the next one, which is red tape. We got a bit of feedback that people weren't too keen on having to fill out yet another piece of paperwork for their regulator and pay yet another fee to their regulator for them to register their team name. So all in all, I have to say, though, very few of those comments, but something that did emerge and that we did address. So the impacts of the new rules. So as I said, these came into effect on April 1st. So we've had a bit of time to measure kind of how things have been going. And we've had quite a few interesting things happen. So Overall, we've seen a general growth in the number of teams registered with BCFSA. As of December 31, so prior to implementation, we had 1,527 registered teams. 380 were one-person teams. So you have to remember right off the hop, at implementation, 380 teams were no longer real estate teams. Yeah. We have a bit of a dying breed of brokers in BC. I think agents practicing. We have 28,000, maybe 29 right now. Yeah, we have a big licensee population. Managing brokers, about 1,200. So that gives you a sense of how many agents are at each brokerage. Yeah, it's a big number. It's a very big number. So to give you a sense, so again, the 380 that were one-person teams dropped off, and we've since had 300 new teams register with BCFSA. But if you take away those 380, really, it's more like over 600. So we have a lot of people coming into compliance with the new team rules, which is great. Since the introduction of the new rules, this is just a month over growth that I'm showing you here until September. I don't have October yet. But yeah, just gives you a sense of how much we've seen grow over the past little bit. Okay, what percentage of licensees? It's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't actually. Yeah, we've done it by team and not by individual numbers, but that's something I certainly can get back to you because it's a good question. We have some 2-member teams, some 50-member teams. So yeah, the problem is it's hard for us to measure because we don't know if there are teams out there that aren't complying, right? We told them April 1. Yeah, when implement of 2023. Yeah. We did say we would work with teams to try and get there, but that was the day that the rules came into effect. Yeah. So just a couple FAQs, so some things that have come up over the course of us implementing these rules. I'm mentoring a junior licensee. Are we considered a team? We get this question quite a bit, actually. And the answer that nobody really loves, but it depends. So, if you're mentoring an inexperienced licensee, it may not require team registration. You just have to think about whether or not you are sharing confidential information on a consistent basis with that individual, and whether or not it would warrant you creating a team, if it's for the period of actually mentoring them. Yes?
Were you allowed to share confidential information if you were not a team?
Only with the permission of your client. So our rules, our duties to clients say that you have to maintain your client's confidentiality. If you want to share that with a colleague, you would have to get the permission from the client to do so. Yeah. Is that different here? No?
I'd say you don't share until you keep what's personal, confidential. You keep it confidential. You don't. If you're mentoring someone, it really sounds like a team if you're mentoring someone and sharing personal information. That was my.
Yeah, that's why. So that's why we say it depends. So if you're just mentoring them by, looking over paperwork and trying to help them draft a contract, perhaps not. But if you're sharing confidential information that, Bob is getting divorced and he needs to let go of his house for $100,000 less, probably should be a team, right?
Do you have to register on that?
Potentially. So if what we're telling licensees is that you just have to ask yourself, what you are sharing with those other individuals. It's tough. You all know the laws of agency, right? It's difficult to know what that trigger is, but that's what we're telling licensees to be mindful of, making sure that, hey, if you're sharing that confidential information, you feel like you shouldn't be, maybe you should have a discussion about whether you should register. Can a team member provide exclusive real estate services to a client if desired? So this was we had this question a lot. So yes, they can. If a client does not wish to receive services from other team members, they can agree that only that one team member provides the services. But nonetheless, those team members are still all considered the agent for the client. So this is the one that came up a lot that people didn't understand. If I'm selling my mom's house, why do my 3 team members need to be the agent as well? Well, they don't. I can provide all the services, but they can't bring the buyer because of our business arrangement.
That
got a hand up?
Yeah, I have a question regarding the sharing of information. Would it not be, because sometimes you're mentoring because you want that person to make it to a team or whatever.
Yep.
However, there's always a period of dance and learning how to dance and whatever. And it could be at the end, it's like hasta la vista, it's
Yeah.
not working out. But you still have to share this information. So I'm wondering with our rules.
I'm thinking in that instance, because we have, I think our rules are quite similar. In that instance where you're not doing that on a regular basis, like if it's a period of time where you're mentoring somebody, I think it's fair for you to just disclose that you're both working on behalf of that client. You might not necessarily be a team. It almost might be I don't know if you use the term co-list here. So it could be an arrangement where you might be working with the same buyer together, but you might not actually be a team because this is a situation where I'm mentoring you. So I think it comes down to disclosing that to the client, right? And saying, I'm working with her and we're gonna share confidential information about you. So we're gonna disclose, we're both providing agency, but we're not a team because I'm just teaching her right now, right? Do you have another question?
Well, I was wondering, when a seller hires an agent, part of a team,
Yep.
you're saying that you can get services from that one agent. If the consumer wishes to only deal with one, yes,
Yep.
but is that consumer aware that the personal information might be shared with 30 other people, even though he or she is receiving all the services from one agent?
Yes, so they would make that disclosure. We have a disclosure form called the Disclosure Representation in Trading Services. Again, I'm not sure what the equivalent is here. So each individual team member would need to make that disclosure that says just that. We are going to share information. You might just be working with Carmen, but these people know all about your business. Yeah.
What are your biggest roadblocks, and is there anything negative that came out of it?
We didn't get a lot of negative, I feel like I should knock on wood because we're not too far from implementation, but we didn't get a lot of negative feedback. The roadblocks, and I don't know if it's a roadblock, but I think it actually helped us understand that there seemed to be a bit of a fundamental misunderstanding of agency. No, we really didn't. We didn't have any. It was really quite seamless. And I think it's because of the education piece that we rolled out at the beginning that helped get everybody understanding. But like I said, it helped us teach or understand that we need to teach a little bit more about agency, because that was really what came out of it for us, that like, oh, I think we need to focus on this a little bit better.
That's a good point, because sometimes you see the teams and you think that's the agency.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the individual,
Yeah.
not the brokerage.
Yeah.
But
As a consumer. Yeah. And that's, we get calls from consumers quite often that speak to that are, I didn't know that I was working with a woman who shares everything with 20 other people. Like they just don't get that. Or conversely, I thought that was a brokerage. I didn't realize they were under the ABC umbrella, right? Or the Sutton umbrella or the Remax umbrella. So is the entire team responsible for the conduct of one team member? This was a question we got a lot. And it hasn't really changed. Our view is that it really does depend. If you are in a team and somebody misbehaves themselves and does something contrary to our legislation, the team would be asked questions. But if that individual said, this was me, this had nothing to do with my team, we're not just going to go after the team by way of the fact that they're a team. We wouldn't do that. So.
I don't know. I don't think you can second look at the same time. If you're part of a team and there's one person that is misbehaving, doesn't it affect the whole team?
Well, it could, but what we're trying to say is that if there's an instance where that one individual did something untoward that the other team members had no idea about, you can't very well punish the entire team, right? Just because they're a team. Yeah.
Including a lawsuit.
Pardon me?
Including a lawsuit, for example.
I don't know about a lawsuit. Perhaps. I'm talking about regulatory from our point of view. Yeah, from a liability point of view, absolutely. I would think I would worry. Oh yeah. And even with us, the whole team would be pulled in for an investigation. But if one person came forward to say, I'm the one who did this, we wouldn't just nail the team just because they're the team behind them, right? We might, but we might not.
It sounds contrary. Either you're a team or you're not.
Yeah, you're a team for sure, but I think it just depends on the conduct. You know, in most instances, the things that we get complaints about are things like misrepresenting square footage or misrepresenting a disclosure. And in those instances, of course, the whole team would wear that, right? Because it's their responsibility to look over their listing, make sure it's okay. But if, you know, somebody did something illegal on the side and the team members had no idea that, you know, Bob was dealing drugs, I don't know that we'd go after the whole team. Yes?
Are all team members equal, or is there a leader or a...
That's a great question. So they're, under our legislation, they're all equal, but we have a lot of business operations where they do have a team leader. But our legislation doesn't provide for that individual having more responsibility than anybody else. It lies on the managing broker. Yeah. Can a team be exempt from the requirement to register? No, very easy answer. There are no exemptions at all to the requirement. So if you're acting like a team and advertising as a team, you have to register with us. Can members of a team act for both buyers and sellers? We've talked about this a few times. I bring it up again because that is the one that I get. So unless they're exempt from the restriction on dual agency, because we do have a narrow exemption that deals with areas that are underserved by other licensees and where it would be impracticable for them to use another licensee. But other than that, no, they cannot represent both sides to the transaction. I am out of time, but I can take your question quickly. Ding, ding, ding.
Seeing that, does it have an impact on teams breaking up, and just since they can't represent both parties, we have less teams and more individuals that can be referred to someone if they can't take the buyer and the seller?
They can. You're not talking about in this situation with dual agency. You're talking about just in general?
In a team, let's say you have a buyer as
Yep.
well, and you can't take it on.
Yep.
You already have the listing.
You can refer.
Refer it to someone else.
Absolutely. You actually have to. So we have a disclosure form for that as well. So you would cease your agency relationship with that individual and refer them to another professional. That's for them to figure out, for the licensees to figure out. We don't prohibit that, but the adequate disclosures would need to be made to that client, whether you're receiving or giving a referral fee. Yes?
I was wondering,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Hang on one sec.
are there restrictions?
Yep.
Like, you can't have dual agency punto final, because here we have, what we have here is that if you explain to the client and this and that, they
No.
still go, I don't care if you don't represent
Yeah.
me,
Yeah, you cannot, even with the agreement of the client in British Columbia, you cannot be a dual agent. But it's only an exemption if there's, again, an area that's rural that's underserved by real estate professionals. Anyway, thank you all so much. It was great to spend the time with you.
Excusez-moi, messieurs, dames, juste pour vous préciser que ce PowerPoint vous sera aussi envoyé en français. C'était juste un petit message logistique.